Welcome to Ancient Heroes, Theseus versus Romulus, from Plutarch's Lives, Volume 1. In this video, we're diving deep into the defining qualities of these two legendary figures to see who truly stands as the greater hero. You might know Theseus as the slayer of the Minotaur or Romulus as the founder of Rome. But beyond the myths, what can we learn about their leadership, their flaws, and the very different paths they forged? Plutarch, the renowned ancient biographer, meticulously compared their lives, revealing surprising insights into their decisions and legacies. For example, why did one hero act purely for glory, while the other was driven by sheer terror? We've transformed this classic text into a clear, engaging narration, preserving the historical depth while making it accessible for modern ears. Discover the hidden truths and often overlooked details that shape these icons of antiquity. Ready to uncover the surprising verdict? Let's begin. Don't forget to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more journeys into classical history. Plutarch's Lives, Volume 1. Life of Theseus. Sacius Senecio. Just as geographers, when they reach the limits of the known world, fill the edges of their maps with vague notes. Here lie deserts full of wild beasts. Here lie swamps untraveled. Here the cold of Scythia reigns, or a frozen sea. So I, in my parallel lives, come to places where history is solid and trustworthy. Beyond that line, all is uncertain, the haunt of poets and myth-makers, fabulous tales rather than truth. After writing the lives of Lycurgus, the lawgiver, and Numa the king, it seemed natural to turn also to Romulus, whose time lies so near theirs. And when I recalled the words of Aeschylus, "Against this chieftain who can best contend? Whom shall I match in fight, what noble friend?" It came into my mind to compare Romulus, the founder of unconquered Rome, with Theseus, the founder of glorious Athens. So, setting aside what is purely myth, we shall examine his story. Wherever the tale resists reason, I ask the listener to show indulgence for the traditions of antiquity. In many ways, Theseus resembles Romulus. Both were said to be the children of gods, though born out of wedlock. Both were powerful warriors, wise as well as strong. Both were founders of cities, Romulus of Rome, Theseus a joint founder of Athens, each among the most illustrious of all cities. Both, too, seized women by force, and both suffered troubles within their own households, ending their lives in conflict with their own people. As for birth, Theseus traced his lineage on his father's side to Erechtheus and the firstborn children of the Attic soil, on his mother's side to Pelops, the greatest of the princes of the Peloponnesus, who fathered many children, married his daughters into the noblest houses, and made his sons kings. One of those sons was Pythius, grandfather of Theseus. Though he ruled the small state of treason, Pythius was renowned above all men of his age for wisdom and eloquence. Some of his sayings, like those of Hesiod in the Works and Days, long survived. One, recorded by Aristotle himself, ran, "To friends, let promised pay be duly paid." Euripides, too, calls Hippolytus the child of holy Pythius, bearing witness to his reputation. King Aegeus of Athens, longing for children, consulted the oracle of Delphi and received the reply, "Great leader, do not loose the wineskin's foot until you safely reach the height of Athens." Perplexed by this riddle, he sought counsel in treason from Pythius. Pythius, perceiving the oracle's hidden meaning, contrived that Aegeus would lie with his daughter Aethra. When Aegeus left for Athens, he hid beneath a great hollow stone his sword and sandals, telling Aethra that if a son were born who, when grown, could lift the stone and recover these tokens, she must send him secretly to his father in Athens. For Aegeus feared the powerful sons of Pallas, who despised him as childless and plotted against his throne. When the child was born, Some wrote that he was at once named Theseus, from the tokens hidden beneath the stone. Others say he took the name later, when Aegeus acknowledged him in Athens. He was raised by Pytheus and taught by a tutor named Conidas, whom Athenians long after honored with sacrifice before the festival of Theseus. When the boy came of age, as was the custom, he offered the first cutting of his hair to the god at Delphi. Yet he cut only the front in the fashion of the warlike Abantes, so that enemies might not seize it in battle. It was for this that his style of hair was long remembered as the Dachshund cut. For a time his true paternity was concealed, and the Troezenians believed that Theseus was son to Poseidon, their patron god, whose trident marked their coinage, whose temples first received their offerings. But when he grew in strength and judgment, Aethra revealed the truth. She brought him to the stone. With ease he rolled the weight aside, claimed the sword and sandals, and was urged to sail by sea to Athens, a safe and easy journey. Yet he refused. The overland road was dangerous, filled with bandits who made war on travelers. Pytheus tried to deter him, naming each outlaw and describing his cruelty. Still, Theseus held firm, for in his heart he longed to rival Heracles, whose courage and deeds he had heard praised since boyhood. Just as in later years, Themistocles confessed that the trophies of Miltiades would not let him sleep, so too the fame of Heracles gave Theseus no rest. Though urged to avoid peril, he resolved to face it, proving his noble blood by brave exploits rather than by heirlooms alone. So he set out on the long and perilous road to Athens, vowing no harm to the innocent, but stern vengeance on any who dared to wrong him. On his journey toward Athens, Theseus first came to Epidaurus. There he met Periphetes, a savage man armed with a great club. This robber, known as the club-bearer, barred Theseus from the road and dared him to pass. Theseus struck him down and, taking a liking to his weapon, kept it for his own. From that day he bore it always, just as Heracles bore the lion's skin, trophies that proved the greatness of the foes they had conquered. At the isthmus he encountered Cenes, the pine-bender, who had slain many travelers by binding them to bent trees and then hurling them to their deaths. Theseus seized him, and with the same cruel device put him to death. Thus he showed that true courage can prevail even without practice in villainy. Cenes left behind a daughter, Paragon, tall and beautiful. At her father's fall, she fled and hid among a thicket of wild asparagus, begging the plants in her fear to shelter her. When Theseus called her out and pledged to protect her, she came forth and later bore him a son, Melanippus. From him sprang a line whose descendants long afterward held sacred the asparagus plant, never burning it, but revering it for their ancestress' prayer. Leaving the isthmus, Theseus turned out of his way to destroy the great wild sow of Crommyon, called Phaia. It was no common beast, fierce and difficult to master. Theseus went against it not by compulsion, but of his own will, for he declared that while a brave man need only punish men when they challenge him, he ought to seek out and quell wild beasts for the safety of all. Some, however, say Phaia was in truth no beast, but a murderous woman, whose foul life made her known as the sow Theseus, they say, put her to death. Near Megara, he faced the notorious Sciron. Tradition tells that Sciron forced travelers to wash his feet at a cliff's edge, only to hurl them down into the sea. Theseus seized him instead and cast him down. Yet others tell a different tale, that Sciron was no brigand, but an upright man, kinsman of noble houses, even ancestor to Peleus and Telamon. In this account, he fell later, when Theseus captured Eleusis by treachery and slew him there. So runs the tradition on both sides. From there, Theseus came to Eleusis and wrestled with the Arcadian Circean, killing him in fair combat. Pressing onward, he met Damastes, called Procrustes. This robber forced travelers onto a bed, stretching them if they were too short, lopping them if they were too long. Theseus gave him his own medicine, fitting Procrustes' body to that same cruel bed, and so sprang the proverb of Procrustes' bed. In this, too, he imitated Heracles, who met each oppressor with the very same wrong he had done to others. Thus Theseus purged the land of its terrors, punishing men by the measures of their own crimes. At last he reached the river Cephisus. There he was kindly received for the first time on his journey by the Phytolids, who purified him of blood guilt and entertained him at their homes. After so many dangers, it was the first true welcome he had seen. It was on the 8th day of the month, now called Hecatombeon, that he entered Athens. But within the city he found turmoil. Aegeus's house was thrown into disorder, for Medea, lately exiled from Corinth, lived with a king and promised her drugs to give him heirs. She, quicker than Aegeus himself, recognized Theseus. Fearing he might supplant her, she urged Aegeus to invite him to a feast, and there prepared poison for him. Theseus came to the table. Wishing his father to discover the truth himself, he said nothing of his name, but drew his sword as if to carve the meat. At once Aegeus knew the weapon. Striking aside the cup of poison, he cast his eyes upon his son, embraced him, and brought him before the people. Declaring him heir, Aegeus was cheered, for the citizens already admired Theseus for his boldness and the victories he had achieved. The sons of Pallas, 50 brothers who had long expected to inherit Athens when childless Aegeus died, were enraged. They rose in arms. While some advanced openly upon the city under Pallas, the rest lay in ambush at Gargetus, planning to strike from 2 sides. But a herald named Laos betrayed their scheme to Theseus. He fell swiftly on those in hiding and destroyed them all. At this news, their companions dispersed. From that day the townships of Agnes and Polyne would not intermarry, and heralds never began proclamations with the words here, O Laos, for the name was hated, recalling the treachery of that man. Eager to win further honor and to serve the people, Theseus next sought out the bull of Marathon. This beast long tormented the countryside. He mastered it alive, drove it through the city for all to see, and then sacrificed it to Apollo. On his journey against the bull, he was received by an old woman named Hecale, who feasted him kindly and promised sacrifice to Zeus if he returned in safety. But she died before his return, and in gratitude Theseus ordered that a sacrifice be performed in her name, calling her affectionately by the diminutive Hecaline. Soon afterwards, the ship from Crete arrived once more to exact its terrible tribute. The 7 youths and 7 maidens of Athens, demanded every 9 years by King Minos. For when Minos' son Androgeos had perished in Attica, the land was cursed with famine and plague until Athens made peace on cruel terms. The children sent were cast into the labyrinth, shut within its endless twisting halls, where they were devoured by the Minotaur, half man, half bull, or else perished of hunger, unable to find the way out. Thus was Athens brought low by grief, until Theseus resolved to change her fate. Not all agreed in telling the tale of the labyrinth. Philochorus wrote that the Cretans did not believe in a monster at all, nor that the children were devoured. The labyrinth, they said, was simply a prison from which no escape was possible. King Minos, in honor of his fallen son Androgeus, held games. The youths of Athens, locked away until then, were brought forth as prizes for the victors. The champion was his general, Taurus, a harsh and arrogant man, who mistreated the captives and won every crown. Even Aristotle, in his study of the Bactrians, denied that the children were slain. Instead, he reported, they grew old in slavery until long after they were dedicated as colonists to Delphi, then wandered to Italy and at last to Thrace, calling themselves the Bactrians. Their maidens still recalled their Athenian origin, singing during sacrifice, "Let us go to Athens." But whatever the truth, on the day the third tribute was due, sorrow fell once more upon Athens. Fathers without heirs drew lots, and bitterly reproached Aegeus, blaming him as the cause of their misery. He, they cried, had burdened them with the loss of sons, yet left as his heir a foreigner and bastard. At this, Theseus came forward. Refusing to remain apart from the sorrow of the people, he offered himself to sail to Crete without waiting for the lot. The people marveled at his courage. Aegeus begged him to relent, but his resolution was firm. Tradition tells that the Athenians furnished the ship, but were forbidden to send the youths armed. Always before, it carried a black sail, a sign of certain death. But Theseus gave hope to the city. To the steersman he handed a second sail, white in color, and he charged him, if Theseus returned alive, to set it upon the mast, but if not, to spread the black in mourning. Simonides, however, writes that it was not a white sail at all, but scarlet, dyed with the juice of holm oak, and that this was the chosen signal. In any case, the pilot was Phereclus, son of Amarcias, or, in another version, Nausithous steered and Phaeax served as lookout, both honored later with shrines at Phalerum. When the lots were complete, Theseus gathered the chosen youths, and at the Prytaneum led them to Apollo's temple. There they offered the sacred olive bough, wrapped in white wool, as supplicants, praying for deliverance. On the 6th day of the month Munician, they set sail, the same day when maidens still bring offerings to the Delphian Apollo. Some tell that the god himself promised Aphrodite would guide him, and when he sacrificed a goat by the shore, it turned into a he-goat, so that she was called Aphrodite Epitragia, the goddess of the he-goat. When they reached Crete, poets say Ariadne loved him at once. From her he received the thread to guide his steps. With it Theseus passed into the labyrinth, slew the Minotaur, and led forth the captives. Pherecydes adds that he staved in the hulls of the Cretan fleet to prevent pursuit. Others say the savage General Taurus fell to him in a naval battle. Philochorus tells how Theseus fought him in the games before Minos himself, under the eyes of Ariadne, who rejoiced at his strength and beauty. At Taurus's defeat, Minos relented, released the children, and freed Athens from tribute forever. Yet even here the stories divide. Some say Ariadne was abandoned, hanged herself in despair. Others, that Theseus left her upon Naxos, where she became the wife of a priest of Dionysus. Still others claim she bore Theseus' sons, Staphylos and Enopion. In Cyprus, they told yet another tale, that Ariadne, heavy with child, was left ashore, fevered and faint from the sea, while Theseus was driven back upon the waves. The women of the island comforted her, wrote letters as though from Theseus, and tended her in childbirth. But she died, and they buried her there. Theseus, returning, grieved and founded rites in her honor, setting up bronze and silver images. At their festival one youth lay on the ground and mimicked the cries of a woman in labor, as part of the sacred remembrance. Some of Naxos even told of 2 Ariadnes, one wedded to Dionysus and honored with great revels, the other abandoned by Theseus and remembered with more solemn rites. After leaving Crete, Theseus touched Delos. There he dedicated to Apollo the statue of Aphrodite, given him by Ariadne. Together with the rescued youths, he danced a winding, intricate measure around the altar, imitating the paths of the labyrinth. The Delians call it the crane dance, and they say Theseus first awarded a palm of victory at games he founded there. At last he neared Attica, but in joy he forgot the charge he had laid upon the sail. No white or scarlet was hoisted. The black still hung upon the mast. Aegeus saw it from the cliff, and believing his son slain, cast himself into the sea that still bears his name. Theseus came into harbor and sacrificed at Phalerum, fulfilling the vows he had made. A herald ran to announce his return. On his way some crowned him with garlands, while others, still mourning for the king, struck up a wail. The herald, unwilling to wear conflicting signs of joy and grief, set the wreaths upon his staff instead. Even now, in the rites of the Oschophoria, it is the herald's staff that bears the crown, not the messenger himself. After burying his father, Theseus offered thanks to Apollo on the 7th day of Pioneption, the day when the returned youths entered the city. It was said they pooled together their remaining food, simple boiled pulse, and feasted upon it in fellowship. So on that day still, the Athenians boil a common pot and bear about the Iresian, the olive bough wreathed in wool and decked with fruits, singing for figs, bread, oil, and wine, to banish want and bring gladness to the land. And thus ended the greatest of Theseus's journeys, which not only rescued his people from terror, but gave him a place among the foremost heroes of Greece. The Athenians preserved the very ship in which Theseus returned with the rescued youths. It was a vessel of 30 oars. For centuries they renewed its planks piece by piece as they decayed, replacing the old timbers with fresh. Thus the ship of Theseus became a famous problem for philosophers, who asked, was it the same vessel, though all its parts had changed, or a different one altogether? Theseus also established the festival of the Oschophoria, or carrying of the boughs, which the Athenians keep even now. He had not, in truth, taken with him all the maiden victims appointed by lot. Instead, he chose 2 of his closest friends, young men delicate in form yet stout of spirit, and by tending their skin and hair, teaching them to walk and speak as maidens, disguise them to deceive the eye. In their return procession, he and these disguised youths bore branches, dressed much like those who carry them at the Oschophoria still today. They honored Dionysus and Ariadne in memory of the voyage, but also because their return came at the season of harvest. The women called supper carriers joined the rite, imitating the mothers who once brought food to their doomed children. Old tales were told along the way, even as once mothers comforted their little ones with stories against fear. Theseus consecrated a sacred precinct for himself, and the families whose children had once been sent as tribute were commanded to make sacrifices there. The duty of this rite he entrusted to the clan of the Phytalids, who had shown him hospitality when first he approached Athens. After the death of King Aegeus, Theseus undertook his greatest design, the land of Attica, till then divided into many villages and townships, often at strife among themselves. He united into a single state. Visiting each tribe, he won over the poor with promises of equality, and persuaded the nobles that their dignity and privileges would remain secure. Then he abolished the separate councils and offices of each township, built one common prytaneum or council house upon the Acropolis, and named the new city Athens. To bind it together, he instituted the great Panathenaic festival, common to all, and created another festival for resident foreigners on the 16th of Hecatombean, a rite observed even now. Faithful to his word, he laid down the title of king and gave Athens a commonwealth, himself serving only as general in war and guardian of its laws. The Delphic oracle had promised him, son of Aegeus and of Pytheus maid, my father has within thy city laid the bounds of many cities. Let not thy soul be cast down, the bladder may be dipped, but cannot drown. So Athenians learned that their city, like a buoy, might sink beneath the wave, but always rise again. To enlarge the citizen body, Theseus proclaimed rights to strangers, calling Athens a home for all peoples. Yet he preserved order by dividing the state into 3 ranks: the nobles who oversaw religion and law, the farmers who sustained the land, and the artisans who supplied craft and trade. In this way, each would excel in its proper sphere, the one in honor, the other in usefulness, the third in numbers. Aristotle declares that Theseus was the first to incline towards democracy and to strip monarchy of its name. And Homer himself, when reciting the Greek host at Troy, names only the people of the Athenians. Theseus struck coinage with the figure of a bull, perhaps recalling the bull of Marathon or Minos General Taurus, or else to honor agriculture. By conquest he annexed Megara, and on the isthmus raised a pillar dividing east from west. To the east it read, "This is not Peloponnesus, but Ionia." To the west, "This is Peloponnesus, not Ionia." And there, in rivalry with Heracles, he established the Isthmian Games. Some said the festival honored Melicertes, once celebrated by night and mystery. Others, that it propitiated Sciron or Cenes, kinsman slain by Theseus. Whatever the truth, he ordained them in Poseidon's honor, and arranged with the Corinthians that Athenians attending should always have the place of honor, marked by a sail stretched on the ground from their public ship. Later, Theseus sailed with Heracles on the expedition to the Euxine, or, as most say, mounted one of his own. There he captured Antiope. Some call her Hippolyta, queen of the Amazons. At least one story claims he seized her by treachery. The Amazons welcomed his ship without suspicion. He lured her aboard with gifts, then set sail with her captive. In time he founded a city, Pythopolis, near the river Solois in Bithynia, named after the Pythian Apollo, and in grief for a young Athenian companion who had perished in hopeless love for the Amazon queen. Thus began the famed Amazonian War. For soon the warrior women invaded Attica itself, advancing so far that they encamped within the city. Some deny they crossed the Bosporus on the ice, as others say, but the tombs around Athens and the names of places bear witness they fought there. For months, both sides held back. At last, after sacrificing to the god Phobos, Theseus gave battle. The Amazon left wing held ground at the place now called the Amazonium, and their right reached up to the Nyx. From the Museum hill the Athenians issued forth. Fierce fighting raged along the road to the Pyrrhic Gate, where tombs of the fallen still stood. On one flank the Amazons pressed the Athenians back to the very temple of the Furies. Yet on the other, driven by the Athenians from the temple of Pallas, they were beaten back to their camp. After 4 months of struggle, peace was made. Some say Antiope herself brought about the treaty, others that she died in battle by her lover's side, struck down by her own companion Malpadia. Whatever the truth, the Athenians long honored the Amazons in sacrifice, joining their festival to that of Theseus, and burial places of the warrior women were pointed out not only in Athens, but at Megara, at Chaeronea, and as far north as Thessaly, lasting signs of their valor and of the greatness of the struggle they waged in Theseus's day. Here is your audiobook-style adaptation of this closing, fateful portion of the life of Theseus, narrated in clear and natural language, but retaining Plutarch's gravity and dignity. Such, then, is all that is worth telling of the Amazons. As for the tale found in the Theseid, that Antiope raised her warrior women in vengeance against Theseus for his marriage to Phaedra, and that Heracles himself slew them, this is clearly an invention. After Antiope's death, Theseus married Phaedra. By Antiope he had a son, called Hippolytus, though some say Demophoon. The unhappy fate of that house is told alike by historians and the tragic poets, so there is no reason to doubt it. Elsewhere, legends whisper of marriages less creditable, tales never acted upon the stage, that he ravished Nausau of treason, and forced the daughters of Cenes and Circean whom he had slain, that he wedded Peribia, mother of Ajax, and later Pharibia and Iope, the child of Iphicles. It was, too, for the love of Egle, daughter of Panopeus, that he deserted Ariadne, a shameful and infamous deed. Worst of all, he was said to have carried off Helen, still a child, and for that outrage Attica was plunged into war, and Theseus was driven to exile and ruin. Yet many great proverbs sprang from his name, for he was a companion to many heroes in their enterprises, whether in the Caledonian hunt, the voyage of the Argonauts, or the war of the Lapiths and Centaurs. And so men said of any gallant deed, not without Theseus. And when he alone achieved labors equal to Heracles, the saying rose, "Here is another Heracles." Together with Adrastus, he recovered, by truce and covenant, the bodies of the fallen chiefs before Thebes, thus giving to the dead the first recorded honors ever obtained from foes in battle. The rank and file they buried at Eleutheræ. The leaders, by his favor, lay interred at Eleusis. His famous bond with Perithous began in this way. Perithous, famed for valor, once raided the cattle of Marathon. When Theseus armed himself and pursued, Perithous turned to face him. Each, struck by admiration of the other's courage and beauty, withheld his blows. Perithous offered his hand, declaring he would submit to whatever penalty Theseus imposed. And so, instead of enemies, they swore eternal friendship, sealed by an oath. Soon after, Perithous took Theseus to Thessaly for his own marriage feast with Didymaea. At that banquet the centaurs, overcome with wine, laid hands upon the women. In the struggle that followed, Theseus fought beside the Lapiths, who slew many and banished the rest from their land. Some tell differently, that Theseus met Heracles on his way and thereafter often associated with him, joining in holy rites and purifications. In later years, Theseus, now 50, carried off Helen of Sparta, herself no more than a child. Some writers, unwilling to burden him with such dishonor, claim the deed was done by Idas and Lynceus, and that they merely placed her in his keeping. Others even say Tyndareus gave her to him for safety. But the common story runs thus. Theseus and Perithous together seized the maiden as she danced in the temple of Artemis. The pursuers came no farther than Tegea. Confident, the two friends agreed on who should possess her. Theseus won, yet because she was not of age, placed her in the keeping of his mother at Aphidne, charged to guard her secretly. Then, to repay his oath of friendship, he followed Perithous on a far more daring and impious quest, to snatch Chore, the daughter of Hades, king of the Molossians. All suitors of his daughter were required to face the monstrous hound Cerberus, and the victor should wed her. Learning that his guests came not as suitors, but as ravishers, the king cast them into prison. Perithous he slew at once by that savage beast, but Theseus he held bound. About this time, Mnestheus, son of Peteus, first practiced the arts of the demagogue. He courted the nobles, who long had hated Theseus for taking away their local powers when he unified Attica. To the people he whispered that they had not gained liberty in the new state, but had exchanged their ancient laws and ancestral rights for subjection under one foreign tyrant. And while he thus subverted the city from within, fortune struck from without. The sons of Tyndareus, Castor, and Pollux came against Attica to recover Helen. At first they sought her return. When the Athenians replied that they knew not where she was held, the brothers raised arms. It was Academus who revealed the truth, that Helen lay hidden at Aphidne. Therefore the Spartans always honored him, and even in later invasions they spared his grove, the Academy. The Dioscuri marched, took Aphidne in battle, and with it Helen and Theseus's mother Aethra, whom they carried into captivity. So deep ran the memory of this war that towns were named for the heroes who fell, Marathon and Alacus. Afterward, persuaded by Mnestheus, the Athenians welcomed the twins as friends, for they demanded nothing more than the rites of initiation, claiming kinship with the city, as Heracles had once done. They were honored with divine titles as the Annex, guardians and kings. Meanwhile, Aethra, mother of Theseus, remained enslaved, and the poets tell that she was carried even to Troy in Helen's train. As for Theseus himself, he lingered in prison until at last Heracles passed that way. The king Hades was then his host, and Heracles begged him to release Theseus, sparing his life though Perithous was already gone. So Theseus returned to Athens. But he found his people changed. The sites once consecrated to him had been rededicated to Heracles. When he sought to rule as before, the nobles no longer feared him, and the people, corrupted by flatterers, no longer obeyed. He tried to master the state by force, but a faction overwhelmed him. Thus began the decline and ruin of the hero of Athens. When Theseus tried once more to secure his rule by force, the faction overcame him. Despairing of success, he secretly sent his children away to Euboea, entrusting them to Eliphener, son of Chalcodon. As for himself, he stood at Gargetus, what is still called the Aratyrion, the place of curses, and there invoked solemn maledictions upon the Athenians. Then he set sail for Skyros, believing himself among friends, for he held inherited lands upon that island. At the time, Lycomedes was king. Theseus asked that his estate be restored to him, that he might dwell there in peace. Some say he even sought the king's aid against the Athenians. Yet Lycomedes, either fearing the great fame of the man, or eager to please Mnestheus, who ruled Athens, betrayed him. Under the pretense of showing him his lands, Lycomedes led him to the highest mountain peak and cast him headlong from the cliffs. Others tell he fell by accident, stumbling in his after-supper walk, as was his custom. Thus perished Theseus, forsaken. No one honored his passing. Mnestheus reigned in Athens, while his sons grew up as private men under Eliphener. They followed him to Troy, and only on Mnestheus's death returned to reclaim their city. But in time, Athens remembered. At Marathon it was said the ghost of Theseus appeared, clad in gleaming arms, leading the charge against the Persians. Greater honor came still later, for after the Persian Wars, when Phaedo was archon, the Delphic oracle commanded that the bones of Theseus be brought home and revered. Cimon conquered Skyros, and seeking the hero's tomb, saw an eagle pecking at a mound of earth. Digging there, he found the coffin of a giant man, with a bronze spearhead and a sword beside him. These relics he carried on his trireme to Athens. The people received them in solemn procession, with sacrifices, as though Theseus himself had returned. They buried him in the heart of the city, near the gymnasium, and decreed that his tomb should forever be a sanctuary for slaves, for the poor and oppressed, since in life he had been their champion and avenger. His chief festival was held on the 8th of Pyaneption, the day he returned with the rescued youths from Crete. Yet each month, on the 8th day, Athenians also honored him. For 8 was sacred to Poseidon his father, the steadfast upholder of the earth, and so it became the number of the sun as well. Thus Theseus was reckoned not only a king, but a hero, a founder of Athens and protector of her people, honored in death with the love and reverence denied him at his end. Life of Romulus. The beginnings of Rome, famed throughout the world, are told in many and conflicting tales. Some say that the wandering Pelasgi, who subdued many nations, finally settled there and named the city for their own strength in battle. Others relate that, after the fall of Troy, exiles were carried by storm to the Tuscan coast and found refuge on the Tiber. There, weary of the sea, their women, led by one of noble blood named Roma, burned the ships, compelling the men to settle on the Palatine Hill. Their anger gave place to gratitude when they found the land fertile and the neighbors kind. They named the city for Roma. From this, they say, comes the Roman custom of women kissing their kinsmen, for the women who had burned the ships thus embraced the men and soothed their wrath. Others tell that Roma was daughter of Italus, or of Telephus, son of Heracles, and wife to Aeneas, or else a daughter of his son Ascanius. Still others say the founder was Romanus, the son of Odysseus and Circe, or Romus, the son of a Mathian sent by Diomedes, or Romes the Latin, who expelled the Tyrrhenians from a land. Even those who hold to the more rational tale, that Romulus founded the city and gave it his name, dispute his birth. Some say he was the son of Aeneas by Dexithea, and that he and his brother were set adrift when their ship alone was saved from floods. Others claim that Roma, daughter of that Trojan line, bore him to Latinus, son of Telemachus. Others give his mother as Emilia, daughter of Aeneas and Lavinia, begotten by Mars himself. And still others tell most marvelously that in the house of Tarchetius, king of Alba, there arose from the hearth a strange, divine image. An oracle declared a virgin must be given to it, and from her a son would be born surpassing all men in valor. Tarchetius commanded his daughter, but she sent her maid in her place. From her were born twins, cast away at his order, suckled by a wolf, and fed by birds until a shepherd found them. These children grew to slay Tarchetius, so Promathion records in his history of Italy. But the tale most credited, told first in Greece by Diocles of Peparethos and followed by Fabius Pictor, recounts the line of Aeneas at Alba Longa, how it came to Numitor and his brother Amulius. Amulius seized power, making Numitor's daughter a Vestal virgin, lest she bear sons who might avenge her house. She bore twins nonetheless. By Mars, it is said. Amulius doomed them to death, but they were laid by the swollen river, and in the shade of the fig tree Riminalis, a she-wolf gave them suck, and a woodpecker watched over them, both creatures sacred to Mars. Shepherds brought them up, and from Acca Laurentia, foster wife of Faustulus, they learned the ways of men. Thus the divine twins, Romulus and Remus, came to manhood, and from their noble bearing, their boldness, and their strength, all foretold that destiny had marked them to found a city which would not only bear their name, but rule the nations of the earth. Faustulus, the humble swinehood of Amulius, kept the foundling brothers safely hidden from all suspicion. Some say Numitor already knew the truth and even shared the cost of their upbringing. In time, they were sent to Gabii, learning letters and all the training befitting sons of noble birth. They were called Romulus and Remus because they were first seen clinging to the she-wolf. Even in youth, their noble origin betrayed itself, in their stature and beauty, and later in their courage and strength. Of the two, Romulus was judged the more prudent, shrewd in counsel and born to command, while Remus was fiery and daring. They despised the king's officers, fearing them no more than any common foe, and won the love of fellow herdsmen and the poor by defending the land against brigands, hunting down marauders, and avenging the harmed. So they grew renowned. A quarrel then broke out between the herdsmen of Amulius and those of Numitor. Cattle were carried off, and in the fight that followed, Amulius's men prevailed, swelling their band with desperate men and slaves. In one of these skirmishes, while Romulus was away at sacrifice, for he was much given to rites and divination, Remus was taken alive. He was led before Numitor. Numitor, struck at once by the youth's great size and dauntless spirit, restrained himself. He feared his brother, yet he saw in Remus something of destiny. He questioned him gently. Remus, emboldened, confessed, "I will hide nothing from you, for you seem more like a king than Amulius. As for us twins, we long believed ourselves sons of Faustulus and Laurentia. But strange stories have come to us, that we were cast forth as infants, suckled by a wolf, and fed by a woodpecker. The cradle with brazen bands still exists. Whether these things be true or not, We now stand on the edge of discovery or of death. Hope stirred Numitor's heart. Calculating Remus's years, weighing the signs, he saw in him the nearer hand of Providence, and longed to confer secretly with his imprisoned daughter. Meanwhile Faustulus, hearing that Remus was in Numitor's keeping, hastened to Romulus and told him all, that they were the grandsons of Numitor, set forth to die, preserved by miracle. With trembling haste he carried the ancient cradle to Numitor, but the king's guards detained him. One, who had been present long before at the exposure of the babes, recognized the vessel by its workmanship. Brought before Numitor, Faustulus confessed little, fearing Amulius's wrath, yet he hinted truth enough, that Ilia had always longed to see her children's cradle, which he carried beneath his cloak. Amulius, seized with fear when the rumor began to stir, sent hastily to Numitor to learn if the youths still lived. But by then the affair had run beyond his control. Already Remus had roused men within. Already Romulus gathered a stout force without, dividing them by companies, each 100 strong, each led by a man who carried a bundle of sticks and straw upon a pole, called manipulus by the Latins. From this the Roman maniples took their name. Romulus attacked the palace from without, Remus set fire within, and Amulius, taken in the midst, was slain, unable to act or devise escape. So ended the tyrant who opposed the blood of Aeneas. Fabius Pictor and Diocles both tell this tale as the birth of Rome. Some doubt it for its theatrical form, yet chance often lends marvel to history, and what empire ever grew more wondrously than Rome? After Amulius's fall, the twins restored kingship to their grandfather Numitor, providing also for their mother. But they themselves would not reign in Alba. Proud and restless, with bands of outlaws and wanderers clinging to them, they resolved to found a new city near the place where they had been nourished. At first, the band was more a rabble than a citizen body, fugitives, slaves, debtors, men of broken fortunes. To rule them was either to scatter them uselessly or to weld them into one. So they declared the new city would stand as a sanctuary. Slaves would not be returned to masters, nor debtors to creditors, nor exiles to their judges. The city, they proclaimed, is asylum sacred by oracle. Thus its hearts filled swiftly with households, no fewer than 1,000, they say, at the start. But the brothers quarreled at once over the site. Romulus preferred the Palatine. The square hill they later named Roma Quadrata. Remus favored the height of the Aventine, which men long remembered as the Ramonium. So they sought an omen from the sky. Each sat apart to watch the flight of birds. To Remus 6 vultures appeared first, then to Romulus 12. Some said Romulus tricked his brother, claiming the greater omen after seeing none. Others, that the 12 truly came, but after Remus had first sight of 6. And so the Romans to this day count especially the vulture as a bird of augury, rarely seen, seldom nesting before mortal eyes, yet harmless to the living, feeding only on the dead, as if sent from another world to mark the will of heaven. Thus judgment of fate inclined to Romulus, and the strife of brothers, once concealed, now moved forward to its destined end. When Remus discovered the trick in the augury, he grew bitter. While Romulus marked out the city's walls with trench and plow, Remus mocked the work. In scorn, he leapt across the furrow. At that moment he was struck dead, whether by Romulus himself, enraged at the insult, or by Celer, one of his companions. Faustulus, their foster father, too was slain in the strife, together with his brother Pleistinus, who had aided him in rearing the twins. Romulus buried Remus and their foster parents at the place thereafter called the Remurium. Then, with rites taught to him by men of Etruria, he consecrated the new city. A trench was dug around the Comitium, filled with first fruits of all that sustains life. Each settler brought earth from his native land and mingled it upon one common heap. This sacred pit they called Mundus, heaven and earth in one. Around it Romulus traced the circle of the walls. A brazen plowshare was set in a plow drawn by bull and cow, and Romulus himself guided it, his attendants turning each clod inward to mark the sacred boundary. Where a gate was intended, they lifted the plow across, for the wall was deemed holy, but gates must admit the necessities of mortal life. Thus, on the 21st day of April, the city was founded. Ever afterward the Romans hallowed that date as the birthday of Rome. At first they kept it pure, stained by no blood sacrifice, as the day of a holy birth. The Greeks, counting otherwise, say it was on the 30th, and that an eclipse of the sun marked the founding, a wonder recorded by Antimachus the poet. In later times Varro and his friend Terutius, a master of astrology, even reckoned the very hour of Romulus's conception and birth from the fates of his life, with elaborate calculations that may delight the curious more than they persuade the wise. Once founded, Romulus formed into legions all the young men able to bear arms. 3,000 feet, 300 horses. The rest of the citizens became the people or populace. From the noblest, he enrolled 100 elders as a council, named fathers or patricians. Some say the name came because they were true fathers of households, others because they were men who could name their fathers, whereas in a city of fugitives and outcasts few could. More likely, he meant them to stand as patrons, guardians of the people, so that the multitude might not hate their superiors, but regard them as fathers to whom reverence was due. And indeed the senators were ever after addressed as conscript fathers. In this way Romulus bred mutual duty between patrons and clients, the wealthy to defend and advise, the poorer to honor and support, even helping their patrons pay debts or portion daughters. So strong was this bond that not even law compelled a patron to bear witness against his client, nor a client against his patron. For months after the founding came the most daring and infamous deed, the carrying off of the maidens. Some blamed Romulus's own love of war, saying he meant to provoke a quarrel with the Sabines. But the truer cause lay in necessity. His city, full of men and strangers, lacked wives. Despised by neighbors, they could win no brides in peace. So he turned violence into policy, planning that wrong done would yield alliance when reconciliation came. Romulus therefore proclaimed games and sacrifices at the altar of the hidden god Consus, whom some call the equestrian Neptune, others the god of counsel. Many tribes gathered to watch the spectacle, unsuspecting. Romulus sat in a state robed in purple, with armed men beside him. At the appointed signal, he rose, drew his cloak about him. The Romans rushed forward with shouts, seizing the maidens. Only maidens, they say, save one married woman, Hersilia. Valerius writes that more than 500 were carried off, Juba 683, but the symbolic number given was 30, from whom the tribes were named. By this restraint some defend the deed, saying truly it was not madness nor lust, but the forced making of wives to bind the races together. As for Hersilia, some record that she became wife to Hostilius, one of Rome's first men, others that Romulus himself married her, by whom he had children, a daughter called Prima, and a son Aelius, later named Avilius. Thus, with both bloodshed and sacrament, with outrage and necessity together, was Rome brought into being. Among the ravishers, it is told, there were some men of humble rank who seized a maiden of striking height and beauty. When nobles tried to take her from them, they cried out that she was destined for Theseus, a young man of noble family and of good repute. At this all applauded. Many even escorted them, calling out his name in acclaim. From this, in marriage rites to this day, Romans cry aloud Theseus, as the Greeks call upon Hymen. Some supposed Romulus himself gave this as a signal for the seizure, while others linked it to talasia, the word for wool spinning, since the Sabine treaty later required their women to work no task for their husbands except the spindle. Hence the jest remained on marriage days, that a Roman bride's one duty was to spin. So too the custom arose that she was carried over the threshold, not stepping in of her own will, for the Sabine maidens had been carried by force. Even now, the parting of a bride's hair with a spear recalls that Rome's first marriages were taken by war. The seizure happened on the Feast of Consualia, the 18th day of Sextilis, what we call August. The Sabines were a hardy people, unwalled, proud of their Spartan descent. Yet when their daughters were held hostage, they came first offering terms, that Romulus return the maidens and renounce the outrage, and so friendship might continue. Romulus refused to give them back, but bid them instead to accept alliance through these enforced unions. While the Sabines delayed, weighing their reply, Acron, king of the Senonetes, inflamed with anger, declared war. Romulus advanced to meet him. Single combat was proposed, army watching army. Romulus vowed to Jupiter that should he slay his enemy with his own hand, he would dedicate the spoils. He smote Acron and killed him, routed his army, and took the city. Then, with mercy, he made the conquered join Rome as equals, their city demolished, their lives preserved. Thus began Rome's policy of absorbing the vanquished, a custom that made her empire great. To fulfill his vow, Romulus hewed down a tall oak and set upon it the arms of Acron, each piece arranged. Turning the tree into a living trophy, he crowned his head with laurel, girded himself, and bore it upon his shoulder, marching in triumph with his army behind him, singing hymns of victory. This was the first Roman triumph. The spoils he dedicated to Jupiter for Retreus, for the Romans called the blow ferire, and Romulus prayed Jupiter grant him the stroke. These spolia opima, the richest spoils, could only be dedicated when a commander slew a commander with his own hand. Only 3 in all Roman history were so honored: Romulus, Cornelius Cassus, and Claudius Marcellus. But Romulus, unlike the later generals who rode in chariots, entered the city afoot, and so his statues never depict him. Having humbled the Senonetes, Romulus faced new foes. The men of Fidene, Crustumerium, and Antemne rose against him, but all were defeated in battle, and their lands divided among Roman citizens. Yet he allowed the fathers of the stolen brides to keep their holdings, a gesture at reconciliation. The Sabines, angered, chose Theseus as their king and advanced against Rome. The citadel, the capital, was key to the defense. Tarpeus was its commander, and his daughter Tarpeia, greedy for the gold bracelets she saw upon the Sabines' arms, bargained to betray the gate. She asked as her price what they bore upon their left arms. Theseus agreed. In the night she opened the way, but the Sabines crushed her under their shields, as well as their gold. So she perished, the traitor loathed by traitors. From her name the hill was called Tarpeian. Even when her body was removed and Jupiter's temple raised, the cliff remained the Tarpeian rock, down which traitors were flung. When the citadel fell, Romulus raged, challenging Theseus to open battle. Theseus agreed, ensuring that, if beaten, his men could retreat into the heights. The armies met on low ground, marshy from the recent floods of the river. There Curtius, a Sabine champion, rode far ahead on horseback, but plunged into the swamp and narrowly saved his life, giving his name to the Curtian pool in the forum. Then battle was joined in earnest. Fighting raged. Hostilius, husband of Versilia, was slain. Many others too fell. At one moment Romulus, struck on the head by a stone, was nearly felled, and the Romans, losing heart, fled up toward the Palatine. Romulus, recovering from the blow, tried to rally them, but they heeded him not. In desperation, he lifted his arms to heaven and prayed aloud to Jupiter, god of Rome, not to let his new city perish before his eyes. It is said the prayer was answered. The fugitives halted in awe, ashamed before their king. There they rallied, on the spot where afterwards stood the temple of Jupiter Stator, the stayer of flight. Regaining their courage, they turned and fought once more, driving the Sabines back as far as the Palatine and the shrine of Vesta. Thus the struggle, fierce and still undecided, set the stage for the most famous reconciliation of all. As the Romans and Sabines braced themselves to resume the slaughter, a strange and awe-inspiring sight arrested them. From every quarter rushed the Sabine women, the very maidens once carried off, now wives, now mothers. Their hair fell loose, their garments disheveled. Their cries mingled with shrieks and lamentations. Some bore infants pressed to their breast, others clung to little children at their side. They threw themselves between the ranks, weaving in and out among the fallen. They addressed fathers and brothers on one side, husbands on the other, pleading, reproaching, weeping. "Why this cruelty against us?" they cried. "First we were torn from our families by force. Yet you, our kin, when there was time, did nothing to reclaim us. Now that we are bound by marriage and motherhood, you would sunder us again, wives from husbands, mothers from children. We suffer more in this war than in the first outrage. If the quarrel is about us, then carry us off together, husbands, children, and all, but do not divide us anew. Do not make us captives twice over." So Hersilia, wife of Romulus, spoke at length. The other women added their entreaties with tears. The soldiers of both armies melted and fell back, leaving space for the trembling women between the lines. A murmur of pity ran through the host. Sorrow drowned the thirst for vengeance, and the chiefs met in conference. There the women pointed out fathers to their sons-in-law, brothers to their brothers-in-law, children to grandsires who had come against them. They ministered to the wounded, fetched food and drink, and showed that in Rome they were mistresses of their households and honored by their husbands. Their testimony softened all hearts. Peace was agreed upon. The women were to stay with their new husbands, relieved of all toil save the spinning of wool. The Romans and Sabines would dwell together as one, the city retaining the name of Rome, but the people to be called Crites, after the Sabine city of Theseus. Romulus and Theseus would reign side by side, equal in command. The place of this treaty was then called the Comitium, from quar, to meet. The state was doubled, its senate increased by 100 Sabine elders. The legions now numbered 6,000 on foot and 600 horses. 3 tribes were formed, the Rhamnenses from Romulus, the Titianses from Theseus, and the Lucernenses from refugees once admitted by Romulus under the sheltering grove called Lucus. Each tribe was divided into 10 centuries. Some say named for the abducted women, though more likely after places. The women gained lasting honors. Men must yield them right of way on the streets, utter no shameful word in their presence, nor appear unclothed before them, under penalty of trial. Their children wore the bulla, a golden charm hung at the neck, and the bordered robe of purple known as the praetexta. The 2 kings held council separately with their own senate, then assembled together. Theseus dwelt near the hill of Juno Moneta, Romulus near the steps to the circus. There a sacred cornel tree once grew, springing from a spear cast by Romulus, whose iron head took root and budded, growing into a living tree revered as holy. So sacred it was that, when it later withered after Gaius Caesar's workmen damaged its roots, the people lamented its death as though it were a citizen. From the Sabines the Romans adopted new rites, shields, and months, while preserving their own festivals. New feasts were added. The Matronalia, honoring the women for ending the war, and the Carmentalia, in memory of the prophetess Carmenta, wife of Evander. As for the Lupercalia, it is still held in the month of purification, February. In this ancient rite, goats are sacrificed, and 2 noble youths are touched upon the brow with a bloody knife, then cleansed with wool dipped in milk, upon which they must laugh. Clad only in goat skins, the Luperci run about striking those they meet with thongs, a blow believed to aid women in fertility. A dog is sacrificed too, whether as part of the purification, as the Greeks once did, or in memory of the wolf that nursed Romulus, no one can be certain. Thus out of war and treachery, of blood and lamentation, unity arose, and Rome, born by violence, was tempered also by reconciliation. Some say it was Romulus, not Numa, who first ordained the sacred fire of Vesta and the order of holy virgins who keep it. Certainly Romulus was a man deeply religious, skilled in augury. He bore with him the crooked staff, the lituus, to mark out the heavens for the watching of birds. Long preserved in the Palladium, it was lost when the Gauls took Rome, yet later was found unharmed, lying beneath the ashes, while all else had been spoiled. He made laws also. The harshest was this, that a wife might not divorce her husband. A husband might put away his wife only for grave crimes, poisoning of children, counterfeiting of keys, or adultery. For any lesser cause he decreed that the husband's goods be divided, half to the wife, half to the temple of Ceres, and that he himself must sacrifice to the dark gods below. He named all murder parricide, as though killing one's parents were so monstrous as to include any shedding of blood. And for many centuries no parricide was known at Rome, until after Hannibal's wars. In the 5th year of joint rule, kin of King Theseus attacked ambassadors from Laurentum. Romulus urged punishment, but Theseus shielded the criminals. Before long, while both kings were sacrificing at Lavinium, relatives of the slain fell upon Theseus and killed him. Romulus, untouched, was honored for justice. He buried Theseus with due dignity on the Aventine, near the Armilustrium. Some whispered he was glad to be quit of his colleague, for he sought no vengeance, saying blood has been atoned by blood. The Sabines did not rise against him, but remained loyal, revering his power and believing him heaven's chosen. Other Latin peoples too sent embassies and sought alliance. Romulus waged war. Fidini took, either by swift assault with cavalry cutting down their gates, or else by ambush in reprisal for their raids. He planted the place with Roman colonists. A plague then fell, afflicting both city and countryside, and a rain of blood struck terror into men's hearts. It was deemed the gods were wroth for the unavenged deaths of Theseus and the ambassadors. Only when the guilty were punished, on both sides, did the plague lessen. Even so Camirium dared attack, thinking Rome too sick to fight. Romulus overran them, slew 600, transplanted half their survivors into Rome, and settled twice as many Romans again in Camirium. Thus Rome grew, 16 years only since its founding, yet already the city teemed with citizens. Spoils from Camirium included a brazen 4-horse chariot, which Romulus dedicated to Vulcan, setting atop it an image of himself crowned by victory. Soon after, mighty Vi tested him. They demanded Fidini, claiming it theirs. Romulus answered proudly that they had let Fidini fall to ruin, and now begged for what Rome had rebuilt. Battle followed. At first the Romans fell at Fidini, with heavy loss. But later, Romulus won a second battle by strength and swiftness that seemed divine. He marched on Vi itself, and the beaten city sued for peace, 100 years' alliance, the surrender of lands and saltworks, and 50 noble hostages. For this triumph Romulus celebrated procession through the city, his third. Among the captives was the general of Vi, mocked as foolish, led in boy's garb. Even now, in sacrifice for victory, Romans lead an old man through the forum in a child's robe and bulla, crying Sardinians for sale, in memory of that day. Yet after glory came arrogance. As with all who rise beyond measure, pride altered his ways. Romulus assumed a king's pomp, purple tunic, bordered toga, audiences taken reclining, and always guarded by the band of swift youths called sellers. For the first time lictors walked before a Roman ruler, rods in hand. When Numitor died in Alba, though Romulus might have claimed the throne himself, he left it to annual magistrates, as if to please the people. But in Rome itself, he disregarded senate and nobles alike. He parceled out land by his own will, released hostages without their counsel, and gave command as though the fathers were only shadows, summoned to hear his decrees. Thus suspicion fell upon him when, not long after, he vanished suddenly. It was on the nones of Quintilis, July, as we call it. Some say the senators slew him in the temple of Vulcan, dismembered his body, and hid the parts beneath their cloaks. While he addressed the army near the Goat's Marsh, a storm of thunder, wind, and rain engulfed the place. Darkness fell, with portents in the sky. When the storm cleared, Romulus was gone, vanished, body and raiment alike. The nobles proclaimed he had been caught up among the gods. Trouble not yourselves, they told the people. Worship him, pray to him. For now Romulus is no longer a king among men, but a god, protector of Rome. Thus the founder of the city, born of arms and augury, by his last mystery became divine, and Rome received her first king as Quirinus the god. The Romans, when told that Romulus had been taken to the gods, departed from the field rejoicing. They prayed to him now with confidence and hope. Yet some, less credulous, suspected darker things, and whispered that the senators themselves had slain him, and cloaked their crime in a fable. Then came Julius Proculus, reckoned among the noblest of patricians, an early colonist from Alba, a friend and companion of Romulus himself. In the forum he swore upon oath, touching what was most sacred, that Romulus had appeared to him. He said, "As I walked upon the road, Romulus came to meet me, majestic, taller and more glorious than ever before, clad in shining arms. I was struck dumb in wonder. At last I dared ask, 'O king, why have you left your people in suspicion and grief? Why abandon Rome, the city you founded?' He answered, 'It pleased the gods, Proculus, that I should dwell among mortals so long, and after founding a city of great dominion, return once more to heaven, whence I came. Tell the Romans, by courage and self-restraint shall they rule all nations. And know this, henceforth I am your god, Quirinus, guardian of Rome.' The oath and bearing of Proculus persuaded all. Reverence seized the crowd, and every tongue was silenced. They dismissed their suspicions, and prayed to Romulus now as to Quirinus, a kindly deity. Such tales recall the legends of Greece, of Aristides of Proconnesus, whose body vanished though travelers afterwards saw him on the road, of Cleomedes of Astypalaea, who hid in a chest from which no hand could bring him forth, until at last it lay open empty, the oracle naming him last of the heroes. Of Alcmene, too, whose body when carried to the grave was found turned to stone. Stories such as these confound the body with the spirit, raising both to heaven, contrary to reason. Virtue, surely, is of the spirit. As Pindar says, death claims the body, but a living spirit remains, an immortal image drawn from heaven, either returning when freed and purified. This, says Heraclitus, is the fire that flashes through the body like lightning through a cloud. It is folly to believe the flesh ascends to dwell with gods, but it is right to believe that noble souls, purified of mortal stain, pass into the company of heroes, from heroes into guardians, and from guardians, if wholly cleansed, to divine blessedness, not by empty decree of senate, but by the nature of their virtue itself. As for the name Quirinus, some say it is Mars. Others say it derives from a spear, once called Quiris by the ancients. Juno leaning on her spear is therefore Juno Quirites, and the spear in the Regia is addressed as Mars. Others hold it comes from the Romans themselves, called Quirites from their union with the Sabine Quirium. His temple stood on the Quirinal hill, and the day of his translation was kept as the feast of the people's flight, the Noni Capitini, when Romans went forth to the Goat's Marsh. There are two versions of that feast. One says they commemorate the panic of the day Romulus vanished, when men fled calling to one another by name. The other tells of later war with the Latins after the Gauls, and of the slave woman Philotis, who with her fellows tricked the enemy and raised a torch by a fig tree. So the Romans fell upon their foes at night and won victory. In either tale the nones are called Capertini from the fig tree, and women, free and slave alike, take part in the feast beneath its branches. Romulus, they say, was 54 years of age, and in the 38th year of his reign, when he passed from the earth, whether by treachery of men or by translation to the gods. Comparison of Theseus and Romulus. We have now gathered all the memorable particulars of Theseus and Romulus, and may set them in comparison. First, consider their beginnings. Theseus, heir to a throne in treason and free to rule with ease, chose instead a life of risk and heroic deeds, seeking glory of his own accord. Romulus, by contrast, an exile and threatened with death, was driven to bravery by necessity. As Plato says, fear made him bold, for dread of slavery and punishment forced him into exploits. Romulus's most significant act at first was the slaying of a single man, Amulius of Alba. Theseus's early victories were greater in scope. He slew Cenes, Sciron, Procrustes, and Periphetes, scourges of Greece, whose cruelty devastated the land. By removing them, Theseus delivered others from evils they had never dared confront themselves. Moreover, Theseus might have sailed safely by sea to Athens, avoiding hardship, yet he courted danger by land, battling evildoers not for his own sake, but for the common good. Romulus and Remus endured Amulius quietly until he struck at them. And while Romulus fought bravely against Acron and the Sabines, Theseus likewise matched himself against the Centaurs and Amazons. Greater still was his courage when he offered himself for the Cretan tribute, sailing with the doomed youths and maidens, ready to die for his city. Whether to the Minotaur or the sacrificial tomb of Androgeus, or to slavery under Crete, he faced it freely. His daring was sustained by the passion of Ariadne, a love heaven seemed to send for his deliverance. Both men were born to rule, but neither showed himself a true king. Theseus leaned too far towards democracy, Romulus too far towards despotism. A king must balance his powers, neither surrendering them nor pressing them too harshly. In this matter, one erred out of indulgence, the other from arrogance. As for their misfortunes, both stand accused. Romulus in the killing of his brother, Theseus in the loss of his son Hippolytus. Romulus's act, in the midst of public deliberation, seems harsher. Theseus, though blinded by slander, jealousy, and love, inflicted only words and curses, while the youth's death came by chance. There, Theseus deserves the gentler sentence. Yet Romulus achieved more out of less. Born with nothing, branded a slave son, he freed his people, restored his grandsire, slew a tyrant, and founded a city from nothing. Theseus, with inheritance awaiting him, abolished other men's kingdoms to make Athens one, but Romulus built Rome from the dust. He spared the conquered and turned them into citizens, welding nations together. Theseus, by his unions with women, sowed strife. Ariadne abandoned Antiope's war, Helen's seizure, and enmity with Sparta. Romulus carried off many women, yet held only Hersilia as wife, and through wise treatment and just custom, turned outrage into alliance. From his act unity was born marriage sanctified, and for centuries no Roman was divorced from his wife. From Theseus's unions, Athens gained only quarrels, wars, and lasting enmities. Romulus honored his mother, restored his grandfather, and took no vengeance on kindred. Theseus, through neglect of the fateful sail, brought his father to despair and death, a fault hardly less than parricide. Lastly, we may judge by the favor of heaven. To Romulus, the gods gave aid and signs of destiny. To Aegeus, the father of Theseus, the oracle spoke darkly, warning against foreign unions. It seems to bear witness that the birth of Theseus was not by divine approval, but against it. Thus, while both performed deeds worthy of memory, Romulus was the greater in fortune, in founding dominion from nothing, and in winning for himself not only kingship, but at last a place among the gods.